Hello, and a very warm welcome to our fourth session on dissecting capitalism, its past, present, and future. Today's session is titled as Designing a Pro-Market Social Protection System, a literature review, and the session speaker is Professor Einar Øverbye. The importance of welfare states and public welfare has come into the fore with the onset of the pandemic. The large-scale physical and economic distress faced by the citizens due to limited healthcare systems, loss of jobs, cutback on economic opportunities, lack of financial support, all of this puts the focus on the importance of welfare states. In today's session, Professor Einar will take us through various arguments made in favor of and against having a rule-based welfare state in place. Can welfare states improve economic efficiency, and what are the mechanisms through which this can be achieved? What features of the welfare state needs to be borne in mind while analyzing their economic impact across different political and different market structures? Professor Einar says that the devil is in the detail and the design, and we look forward to his versions and views on applicability and effectiveness of these customized and designer welfare states. I call upon Shyam to introduce our speaker for today. Over to you, Shyam.
That was a flattering intro, and I'm not sure I can add on much. But once again, I would like to welcome Professor Einar. Since the founding of the modern welfare state in the late 19th century, there have been various debates on public welfare and such fundamental systems. And a common worry for public welfare is that it may be a disincentive to thrift. And the worry in its basic form is concerned with economic efficiency. And it's not a new topic after all. The economic efficiency of the welfare state has been long debated amongst economists. And today we will gain further insight into this topic. And this session focuses on Professor Einar's chapter in the Oxford book titled Disciplinary Perspectives. And now I grant the floor to Professor Einar. The floor is all yours, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. And Anesha, also thank you for the introduction. And Satvik also for inviting me in the first place. Very nice to be here. And yes, let me add a little bit more about myself. I'm a professor in political science, really, but I have worked for about 35 years in so-called applied social research. First in my own country is Norway, my own settings. Then I extended that to Scandinavia, to Europe, United States, Australia, and New Zealand, and then done some work on South Africa and China. And for the last 10 years, I've been teaching international social policy and health policy, where also extended the same kind of theories and thinking to what we in the old days called the Global South, but really now make this distinction between low-income countries, middle-income countries, and high-income countries. It's a much more diverse world now than it was. The topic of my talk might provoke some of you a little bit. That was actually intentional. It's designing a pro-market social protection system. The issue the problem I want to address in this talk is classic, important question in today's world, namely if the welfare state can survive economic globalization. And it's sort of a question that is relevant both in high-income, middle-income, and low-income countries. And I'm going to sort of use economics as an intake, economic theory. My own sort of field where I sort of belong in this field is sort of behavioral economics. I sort of enjoy economic theories who lend stuff from political science, my field, sociology, anthropology, and sociology. So a favorite book of mine is Banri and Duflo's Poor Economics, which is sort of behavioral economics on the world scene. And another hero is Georg Akerlof, and then there are Nicholas Barr. And I'll come back to some of these people at the very end. But I'm sort of mixing in political theory and sociological theory to a varying extent. which I also believe is this fora is sort of dedicated not necessarily to do the neoclassical version of economics, but to be open-minded about what other disciplines can provide. Right. I have some PowerPoints, and I probably should share them because I want to go through a set of arguments briefly. There are many arguments actually to invite in this debate, and then I think it would be appropriate then to you can sort of see them in writing at the same time. But I won't go deeply into each of them because that will be in the lecture in itself, all these different points I'm going to make about how to design social protection systems that can survive economic globalization and might even be a benefit. However, before I show the PowerPoints, let me start with the conclusion, which I learned from my journalist friends is always a good thing. I actually believe that there is a global tendency these days towards redesigning welfare systems in ways that have social investment aspects. Social investments are very broadly defined. And I actually believe there are some arguments, there are strong arguments even inside neoclassical economics for arguing that certain types of social protection systems will actually be a benefit in the global context. And if that's correct, then actually we might assume that countries copy each other. Countries are on the lookout for what works somewhere else. And that means that if there's a bright idea in one country, it sort of gets copied elsewhere. So I think there might actually be, in the long run, sort of a converging tendency towards what we can call social investment welfare state. I call them pro-market social protection systems, but it's about creating social protection systems that work with markets, and at least not works against markets. But it's got to be social protection, because if the people, the majority, don't get social protection, the rulers won't last long. It's a political science argument. So also from the rulers' perspective, they have a self-interest in trying to design, to give people social protection, but to do it in ways that do not undermine the country's ability to have economic growth, which I think is a good thing, particularly in middle and low-income countries, of course, but also in my own. So that's, the gist of the thing. I'll see if I can try to convince you. I would say also that, I'm an empirical scientist. Many of these theories are theories, they're hypotheses. We are trying them out in real life. We also do controlled experiments for some of this kind of stuff. So I'm not, to tell you that this is, nirvana, this is way forward. But it is sort of, I think, it's a way to think about social protection that you will have the ear of politicians, and you might actually do something that is sustainable, help doing something sustainable. But it's an ongoing process, and a lot of the things are stuff that are actually in the research front of the disciplines. So if you do research on these issues, well, I hope there might be some ideas here that you can pick up and might be interesting for you if in a postdoc or in other contexts. Well, so that's trying to have a sales pitch here for what I'm going to talk about. And let me now see if I can share screen. That wasn't as easy as I had hoped, because none of these were the screen I wanted to share. Here it is. Let me see. Getting back again. Share screen. This must be it, I think. Good. And now I can't see you. So if you
Yeah.
have comments and questions, you can interrupt me. But if you don't want to do that, but you have something you want mention, put a question in the chat or a comment in the chat. And when I've been going through this, you can interrupt me. But if you don't want to do that, put the question, the comment in the chat. And after I finish the PowerPoints, we'll go through the chat together, and then we open for the general discussion. So, designing a pre-market social protection system. Can social protection systems survive economic globalization? Incidentally, I would also like, since we are a global community of scholars, put in my email here. If some of you have some thoughts after this lecture and you would like, further comments, perhaps suggested literature, whatever, feel free to contact me. I'm not hard to reach. And I think it's sort of exciting to have these discussions across countries and disciplines. So feel free to send me an email if you would like it afterwards as well. Can social protection systems survive economic globalization? Well, let's see now if I can. Yeah. And sort of a basic argument here, my basic sort of starting point is, what is really social protection? What are these kind of stuff? And lots of the debate also inside neoclassical economics, but also when it comes to, let's say, Marxist economics or behavioral economics, is about, what kind of animals are these kind of stuff, And I think I would argue there are sort of three ways to think about social protection. And those lend themselves sort of to different theories to some extent. And social protection are, in a sense, all three of them at the same time. That is what also makes the debate often confusing. First of all, you can think of social protection as consumption goods. You can actually, if people want protection, social protection, like they want everything else. They want food on the table, they want a house to live in, they want energy, and they want health care if they are sick. They want a pension if they get old. They want unemployment insurance if they should get unemployed, and so on and so on. So these are, in a sense, consumption goods. And we have a very old theory by Adolf Wagner, a German economist, who already more than 100 years ago noticed a peculiarity when it comes to economic growth. He noticed that when a country's economy grew per capita, then an ever-larging share of GDP went to social protection, broadly defined. So, social protection is sort of a normal consumption good. You have more money, you want more of it. And this is actually known as Wagners Law. I noticed that some Chinese colleagues in particular are very interested in Wagners Law. And there are some interesting articles by Chinese scholars on to which extent, the present surge in social protection in China, extending healthcare to the whole rural population at the moment, among other things. If that is sort of an example of Wagner's Law kicking in. But it's sort of an important thing to keep in mind. It is something people want, which also means that it's politically very dangerous to deny people social protection. The question is rather, how to satisfy that demand. And then we come into these other two ways to approach social protection. The second type of thinking is that, think about them as production costs, as indirect labor costs. This is particularly the case if you are dealing with employers who have what we call occupational welfare. Basically means you get health care if you're employed by certain employers, you get pensions if you're employed by certain employers, you have protection against being laid off if you are employed by certain employers, but not by others. So these are sometimes we call these indirect social fringe benefits. A typical example would be automobile workers in the United States who used to have, health care as part of occupational welfare package. But you can also think that you provide these through taxes to the whole population, which basically means that, you socialize indirect labor costs. Basically, the employers don't have to pay indirect labor costs for their workers. Instead, workers and the employers chip in through taxes, and everybody are covered by healthcare, pensions, and what have you. The third way to think about, but still, you need quite large taxes, so it is sort of a production cost, regardless of whether or not this is something that is paid by the employers themselves or by the state through taxes. It means you have to tax employers and citizens more, and there might be a loss there, right? Third way to think, and that's it's a serious kind of thing. We should not poo-poo that. That's an argument. And then we have the third approach. We argue that, well, they are also social investments. Some type of social protection systems, perhaps more than others. Typical thing would be, healthcare. A healthy workforce is a good thing. It's productive. If you have a healthcare system that very fast gets people back into work, then you utilize the labor force much more efficient than if people get sick. They're outside of the labor force for a long time, perhaps forever, and there are not a way to get them back again. Education is also a classic example. Recently, we have activation schemes in the north, and we have conditional cash transfers in the south, who also are very built on this idea about investing in the human capital, investing in health, investing in children. Kindergartens, high quality kindergartens in my own country is something that is sort of argued not only good for the kids, but this is investing in the future labor force. Okay, so these three perspectives on social protection systems we should keep all three of them in mind at the same time. So that's sort of my first point. Social protection from an economic point of view, and I've been asked to have an economic point of view here rather than the political science or sociology point of view. They are ambivalent. Their consumption, which basically means, people want more of it when they get richer, fair enough. They have some costs, but they also have some investment aspects. And here then comes this issue about, can we design social protection systems so that they protect people? They are not very costly, or they're perhaps way to fix these costs so that they don't really create large problems from our industries when they compete internationally. And we have investment in human capital, which my former colleague and mentor in the University of Berkeley, where I studied, Harold Belensky, talked about as the high road to global competitiveness. Invest in human people, invest in human capital, so we don't have to compete with the Chinese about lower wages. Is the alternative. These days, even the Chinese try not to compete with Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, which are sort of underbidding even the Chinese. Go for the high road, go for investment in human capital. And already at this stage, I'll sort of introduce one argument that we use up here in Scandinavia, because we are very much sold into this kind of idea. Maybe I should have started to say that. Scandinavian countries are about the most open economies in the world. We are extremely exposed to globalization, even more than the United States on some measures. So, our industry has to be competitive because we don't really have customs barriers to talk of. And this is sort of a consensus view, also among socialists and conservatives. We should be very open to competition in order to sharpen competitiveness, have an efficient economy. Now, one of the arguments we use for having a large welfare state, the Scandinavian type of welfare state, is that we mainly offer social protection through taxing everybody and then giving everybody health care and pensions and what have you. Now, one of the effects of that is that our firms, they actually have, our competitive firms, they have lower indirect labor costs than, say, US firms. US firms often have very high occupational welfare costs. Also because workers and trade unions, if they can't get public welfare, well, they try to lobby and negotiate good indirect welfare costs, healthcare, and so on from their employers. Naturally, they want to do that. However, that means that our competitors in other countries don't have public welfare.
Excuse me, Einar.
Yes.
I don't know. Did you try to put it in full screen, or have you tried to change your slide?
Thank you. I have put it in full screen by me, but not by you.
No, it's I can see only the when we edit the PPT. So it's a small slide, and on the left side I can see all the.
Thank you for saying that. That's rather irritating because why did that happen? Let me see if I can increase this kind of stuff in some other way. Let's see. Is it better now?
No, it's same. It's just you went to this next slide. I can see the slide too, but
yes. But it's still a small slide. Okay.
It's not the full screen that usually we see, like F5 in Windows, we click and then it's like full screen.
Yeah. Thank you.
If it is Windows, yeah.
Yeah. And this doesn't help at all. It's still small.
No, it's still like in the editing mode, like when we edit the PPT. Yeah.
That's frustrating. That's very frustrating because I can see it, but you can't. Let me wait a second.
Professor, I think when you're sharing, if you share screen instead of when you're pressing share screen, and then you choose, let's say, PowerPoint, I think it'll only show that. But then when you press share screen and then you press on screen, it might show all of it.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll go out of this kind of thing. Let's see. One more try. Still not any better.
We're on the first slide right now.
No, yes, it's not any better, but we're on the slide number 1. But I think we can continue like that. There must be something going on. Yeah.
Okay. You're not on slide number 2 at all at the moment.
No.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, I think I'll simply stop sharing. And we'll basically just do it when I see you. I think that's better in that context. But Satwik has actually got them, so you can eventually send them to everybody if you want to. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, the argument I'm making is that if you can sort of modify and change your welfare systems in the direction that has these investment aspects, and also to limit the particular costs of employers, then your employers have a leg up in the sort of survive in the international competition, and you also have social protection on a much larger scale. Okay. Having said that, there are many types of social protection. So, when we really are going to deal with this, we have to go into the nitty-gritties. We have services, we have subsidized health and nursing care, we have kindergartens, we have education, we have transfers, we have all these pensions, disability benefits, unemployment benefits, social assistance, activation benefits, conditional cash transfers, employment intensive programs, which India used to be famous for, subsidized public employment, and so on. So that services transfers, there are in-kind benefits, you have food stamps, you have subsidized housing, you have subsidized petrol for that matter, and food. And you have regulations, work protection legislation, anti-discrimination legislation when it comes to people with disabilities, and so on and so on. And if you actually want to go in and sort of tweak the systems in a direction that enhances the social investment aspect of them, you have to go into all of these systems because they're different, there are different stuff going on. So you have really to do, a good old Lenin said, a concrete analysis of the concrete situation. Good quote, actually. He was onto something there at least. Then comes the question, why should the state be involved in all this stuff at all? Why can't the market take care of this? Why can't people, who want pensions, buy pensions? Why can't they buy healthcare? Why can't they do that kind of stuff? This is the argument from libertarians. And this is the argument also from some neoclassical economists, And here's sort of, before I knew that there wasn't that many neoclassical economists here, the pitch I wanted to make that, you guys, you neoclassical economists, even if I accept your premises, I can show you that within the neoclassical frame, it makes sense for the state to be involved in providing social protection because markets are simply not able to do it. Why not? Because of market failure argument and market imperfection arguments, which are classical arguments. And so my first argument is why don't we see people simply buying healthcare if they want healthcare? Why don't they buy healthcare? Well, we have this theory of games with asymmetric information. Sorry for those of you who are not really scholar in neoclassical economists, but this is sort of a big hot thing, started by Georg Akerlof, and got the Nobel Prize for that 10, 15 years ago. The thing is, and it's also known as principal agent problems. These are information problems in markets. And just to give an example of this, is that if you go to a health provider and knocks on the door and want to buy healthcare, hey, I want to buy health insurance. They will look and say, yeah, right, you are coming to us and you want to buy health insurance? Yeah, right. Well, they might sell it to you, but they're going to take a very wide margin on how much they're going to cost you, because if you come to them, it's a high probability that you are what we call a high risk or a bad risk. And those who come and want to buy healthcare, who are motivated to do that? Well, it's people who are sick or likely to get sick in the near future. And they know that. They know themselves better than any insurance company can know them. So we got what they call an adverse selection problem. And the problem is that from the insurance company's point of view, I sell insurance, I got to cover my costs. Don't necessarily have to make a profit. I can be very, gentle and want just to cover my costs, but I need to cover my costs. And I can, because of the lower large numbers, which is the base of all insurance, I know that, roughly how many people in India that are likely to get different kind of illnesses next year. So I can, say, pay me this much and an average premium, and you can come to me and buy insurance. And I assume that since I know, I know what is the average cost next year for an Indian customer, if I get the average customer, then I will cover my costs. But here's the problem. Those who want to buy this insurance from me, they are those who know that they are going to cost them more than average. They really have an incentive to buy insurance from me. While those who have a lower probability of getting sick next year, they say, no, this is too expensive. So they don't become my customers. Those who become my customers are those who have a higher probability. what happens then? 1 year goes, and next year, you know, I thought, my God, you know, this is more expensive than I thought, you know. I got to raise the premium, what you need to pay me in order to be covered, because I need to cover my costs. What happens then? Then, you know, my customers last year look at this and say, and someone say, no, it's becoming too expensive, and they stop. Who stays on? It's those who still think this is a good deal. Take this a few years and you see what happens. The whole insurance system implodes. Insurance company implodes. You end up only with those who are 100% certain that they are going to get sick next year, and you have to charge them 100% of what it will cost anyway, so it's not insurance anymore. There are ways you can fix this as an insurance company, diversifying who are the customers and stuff like that. But that basically means, you know, not covering high risks at all. And if the median voter has an average risk, then the median voter might actually be interested in having a public system, because the state doesn't have the selection problem, because the state can say, we have decided to have this healthcare system for everybody, go on the cost, average sum for everybody, and okay, you low risk is going to be crabby, but you are in the minority. So, you know, the majority will decide that they will force low risk to pay up. And because the state, the classic definition of a state, good old Max Weber, the state is an organization that has monopoly on violence within the territory. It's a bit rough, but that's a very good definition, really. So the state can say, you might not want to, exit from the system, but you know, you can't. And you might not want to pay your tax, but you have to, otherwise we'll come after you. So the state can solve that bus election problem. And that is actually an argument for, at least for mandatory systems, right? And this is just one problem. There's a whole smorgasbord, as we see in Scandinavia, about these kind of problems. There was selection, you have interdependent risks, which means probability that I get sick is influenced by if you are sick, which makes it impossible really to have insurance against infectious diseases like COVID. We have also what we call probabilities close to unity. That means you are, the born disabled, for instance, they can't buy disability insurance because, you know, this will already happened. So, you know, and there are much more. Guy who has written about this is Nicholas Barr. You know, wrote a book about it. But if you read only one sort of real economist view of the welfare state, it's his beautiful 1992 article, The Economics of the Welfare State, which really takes you through all of these arguments. So there are market imperfections. And market imperfections, that's neoclassical economics. Asymmetric information games, that's classical economics. You can actually find this argument also in The Road to Serfdom by Hayek, one of his chapters. So Hayek is not a neoliberal, which is on pretend as people who say that haven't really read Hayek. You know, his book is probably the most quoted and least read book in economics. So read Hayek, you know, he's a clever guy. And he had this particular chapter which Nicholas Barr sort of spins on further on that. Then you have the externalities argument, you know. And you can, if there are positive or negative externalities of whatever you're doing, then there's an argument for the state to go in. And for instance, healthcare, you know, if you get well, that's good for you, but it's good for a lot of other people as well, particularly infectious diseases, of course. But also, you know, if you're well, you can work, you can pay taxes, and the taxes comes also back to me. So we have positive externalities of health. And if there are positive externalities, it means that, you know, you will, in a sense, invest too little in your own health because you don't care about externalities, right? So it's actually an argument for the state to do something more to help you, you know, invest in your own health. So not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of everybody else, the positive externality thing. Same thing goes with children. Well brought up children, maybe I'm like an old man now, but I guess I am, so that might be okay. Well brought up children have positive externalities for others. They become good citizens, they pay taxes, and children who are not well brought up, they have negative externalities. Right? Break into stuff, they can be very unpleasant. So you have external argument for investing more in upbringing of children than the parents themselves would be rational to do. Actually, from the parents' point of view, investing very much in children might not really be a good idea, because the investments in children is upfront, but the benefit of that will be of the child. The child will have the most of the benefit of this. And you may hope that your child is going to take care of you while you're old, but that's always a risk, right? It's always a risk, in particular in these days when people move around and can disappear from you and so on. So again, good arguments for, social investment. Actually, that's why we have mandatory education. And then there are sort of prisoner's dilemma kind of situations. That's the third thing. For instance, all employers might think it would be a good thing to have work protection, really good work protection for the workers. But if one capitalist puts in a lot of stuff for work protection, it's a cost for him, which his competitor doesn't have. And because of the logic of the market, it might then be sort of raised to the bottom. All employers might actually, let's just assume that they really are nice people. They really want to care for the workers. It's just that they can't do it, because if they do it, they go bust. So we got to find somebody who's willing to bind everybody to the same agreement. And the prisoner's dilemma game is so that, it's basically an argument for everybody conceding to a joint agreement that somebody's going to punish them if they don't stay with the common agreement, and that somebody is the state. It doesn't have to be the state, but it can be the state. And actually, you can use this argument also when it comes to stuff like abject poverty and an unpleasant social space. I would argue, at least in my own country, I would like to pay a price in order not to have beggars in the street. I would like to pay a price, at least not to have people dying in the street, right? However, if I give money, charity to beggars, well, I'm just one person. I'm not going to get rid of begging just by giving something. And I might actually be tempted to free ride on the charity of others. If others are charitable, then I don't have to be. This is also classical tragedy of the commons situation, or prisoner's dilemma kind of situation. And that gives all of us an interest to say, let's have a social assistance systems that at least make sure that nobody is dying in our streets, and it's not unpleasant to be there. And we do it as social assistance because then nobody is tempted to free ride on the charity of others, and also you don't feel this hopelessness about being charitable yourself when everybody else might then be tempted to free ride on you. Okay, so I use some time on this because these are sort of my main, and there are more on this kind of stuff, but you get my drift, right? All of these are classical arguments. We are inside the neoclassical paradigm. We are not moving outside it. Which basically means that you can talk even to people who are like Hayek, or even Friedman, Milton Friedman, if you read the guy, has actually some arguments in this. And I think that's a nice thing to be able to talk to people, also those who perhaps don't agree with. And there's a little bit of a tactical argument here also. If you can attack your opponents from their own premises and show that, even from your premises, actually, it's my kind of arguments that will win. That's much more powerful than attacking your opponents from some other premises which they don't accept. So this is just a little rhetorical thing, of course. Right. So, I have 5 minutes left and I still have a smorgasbord of stuff. So let me just, fire off some more details about, given that we agree, even neoclassical economists should agree. This is good ideas. Okay, then how do we do it? And I only have 5 minutes to talk about how to do it. But I'll give you some
take a
examples.
little more time, Einar, because
Yeah. Let me signal. For instance, a broad tax base with low levels creates fewer efficiency distortions than a narrow tax base with high levels. Something that seems to be empirically very sound. So if you have a broad tax base, and what we call universal welfare systems are like that, we tax everybody. We don't tax them very much in order to finance healthcare, pensions, what have you. An alternative in practice is that employers, have to use these as indirect labor costs, which basically means it's sort of a tax only on some employers, and it's very heavy tax just for their employers. And that's more distortive for the economy and also for the competitiveness of these employers than if you have a broad tax base, everybody chips in, and then they have low levels. So then some employers have very high costs, others have none at all. So it's less distortive. Second argument, social protection system with a strong investment aspect, education, health, they boost long-term economic growth relative to systems with more limited aspects. So we shouldn't focus too much on old age pensions. Italian welfare states in Europe called it a pension state. You have tremendously generous pensions, 100% for civil servants. But a lot of them don't have anything at all. But it's so much expensive, and they have very early retirement. So they don't have money for kindergartens. They don't have money for preventive care. They don't have money for giving women paid parental leave. All these pensions are sometimes sort of a cuckoo in a nest, especially particularly with aging population. So you should scale back on all these pensions. You should increase pension ages, which all European countries are doing, by the way. And some of my colleagues say this is sort of crabby stuff. This is, yes, this shows the economic globalization is terrible and so on. Yeah, right. But notice that we expand kindergartens, we expand after school care, we expand healthcare, we expand everything, we expand the investment aspects. It's not really a cutback, it's a redesign. Of course, there is suffering involved in this. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be tough on the future pensioners. But still, you can, tough love and that kind of stuff. You can make an argument that, well, at least it's not only bad. You can see the logic of it. And then third is subsidize people, not jobs or industries. Don't subsidize industries, don't subsidize firms, because that will be a cushion for them. They don't have to be competitive. And you need a competitive economy in order to finance all this welfare stuff, right? So you need to keep the competitive high up. But subsidize people. So if people get unemployed, you have unemployment protection. If people have obsolete skills, you subsidize education for them, so to get them back into labor. You subsidize people, you don't subsidize firms or industries. Also because as a state, you're not able to pick the winners. It's too difficult to pick the winners. Invest in people, in general human capital improvement, and then people themselves will find out where they can use their skills in the future to build the economy. No one knows 30 years from now which firms are going to be the productive ones, and if you finance some of them in the belief that that's the future, you're probably wrong. Subsidize people so they can see the chances when they grow up, so to speak. Rule-based social protection systems create predictability than clientelistic systems. Very many welfare systems, in particular low-income countries, are really clientelistic systems. It is stuff you get for supporting the right politicians, or it's ways to build a family base, alliances between families and stuff like that. In order to avoid that, you must have rule-based systems because they cannot be manipulated in a patron-client relationship. Problem with patron-client relationships is that they're sort of unpredictable, really. So we don't want to go and have long-term investments in countries where you don't really understand the rules, and the real rules are different from the formal rules. So you won't get foreign investment, but you also won't get domestic investment because people don't take the chance. This is part of the reason why I see even in Africa, people are rich in Africa, they don't invest in their own country, they put the money in Swiss banks because it's safe. So we got to enhance predictability. So we need rule-based systems where the rules also bind the rulers. Yes. And the final argument here is that, you know, broad-based social protection systems, and here I'm chairing my own team, broad-based protection systems, they may act as what they call credible commitment devices, ensuring that the losers of economic globalization are compensated by the winners. It's actually also an asymmetric information game situation. You know, people, let's take an example. People are discussing if they should open up the economy to globalization. Now, if you do that, if you open it to foreign competition, some of the private firms is going to go bust, right? And but if you trust the classic economic arguments, you know, the pie is going to expand. We will get more competitive pressure. We will get the Ricardian arguments about division of labor. The cake is going to expand. But the potential losers will say, yeah, that's very nice of you to tell us that the cake is going to expand. So that means that you can actually compensate us and still, you know, have some extra, because that's the thing, you know, cake is growing. We can compensate the losers and still, you know, we are a bit better off. We are in a Pareto superior situation, as Pareto is saying. We are potentially in a Pareto superior situation, but it's only going to work if the losers, those who think they're going to lose, really think that the winners are going to compensate them after the fact. Do they trust that they will be compensated? It's risky, right? It's risky. They will say, you know, well, you know, open up for competition, my firm goes broke, I'm left destitute. Then I hope that since you have earned all this money through taxes or in another way, you will compensate me. But, you know, now I'm an unemployed person. I'm powerless. You know, when I was in the firm, you know, I had a trade union. Now I don't have that anymore. How can I trust you when you're saying, smile and say we're going to compensate you? Well, one way to get losers to trust the potential winners is that we have put in place this rule-based system, welfare system. And we have lots of rules here that you get unemployed, you get healthcare for free. Your children are going to go to good schools, you don't have to pay anything for that. They're going to give you nice unemployment protection. They're going to invest in you. We're going to pay re-education for you so we get back in. And this is actually something we argue, and I think that's good sound reason, but it's the reason why in Scandinavia, the trade unions accept globalization. They are not really hysterical about globalization. They don't support protectionist measures because they trust that, you know, the welfare state will take care of our members. And if you think that economic globalization is a good thing, you know, overall, you know, it increases efficiency and stuff like that, then this is really a genius thing. You get the trade unions on board, you get the social democrats on board. Actually, the social democrats started this kind of stuff. You get the socialists on board. But you have to give a credible commitment to the potential losers. Otherwise, they will support politicians who go for protectionism, like Donald Trump. Perfectly understandable why the US working class voted for Trump, given the structure of the US welfare state. So, you know, yeah, don't want to go into that debate, but I think that economic globalization is a good thing. But in order to keep it sustainable, we got to compensate the losers in a credible way, reduce the risk from the perspective, and the welfare state is the way you can do that. Right. Other points, we'll just have to wait it for another day. I think that's, okay, we go there. Yes? So let's
back to
see.
you. Yeah.
I've got 3 questions in the chat here. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. The slides are not moving, right? Yeah, all of those were on
No, these are just that comments. Yeah. Anisha.
Yeah. Technicalities.
Yeah.
So actually, it was Shyam's duty to do the moderation, but
Okay, please.
I am here.
Shyam? Okay, great.
That's how it is.
We will now be opening up the floor for any questions. If you do feel like you have any other questions, please feel free to unmute now and ask, or if you can just put up the questions in the chat box below.
I can ask the warm-up question if nobody is asking.
Definitely. Go ahead.
Okay. Einar, thank you very much. I feel like I'm back to my old class. I have a question with regard to reserve pool of labor, like the classic situation in which most of the developing countries are, especially India. Yes. So all the arguments that why state should care for its people, the economic argument, we forget about politics, are not considered important at all. They think, okay, we have 10 reserve pool of labor. Even if I don't care, 3 of them will survive, and I only need 1 of them. So I don't care if the rest of the 7 die or became non-productive in terms of economic sense. So this is a typical problem for India or South Asian country. So have you ever thought how usually it is dealt with in the past, maybe in Europe, maybe in similar situation? Yeah, please.
Yeah, absolutely. But first, who are we or who are I who do not care? Who is that? Is it the employer or is it the state?
The state or the employer, or let's say those who have power.
Right.
It can be electric state or the market, let's say the employee. Yeah.
Well, I would sort of say, I can understand that the employer might not care. He gets somebody else to he gets sufficient quality employees because there are so many of them and so on. So the incentive structure of the individual employer might be like that. I know you're disregarding human feelings, right? We're sort of hard-nosed economists here. However, the state has a different, the rulers of the state have a different incentive structure. Because those 7 people are going to die, they might vote. Okay? Right? So, they are important to you. So 3 get employment, 7 die. Well, that means that 70% of the voters, might vote against you in the next election. So, and you care about that. You care about that. So for that reason, you are very wary of this. At least if you are in the system, doesn't necessarily, okay, the democratics, that's the point of a democratic system. It is to install the fear of the hearts of rulers that if they are totally disregarding the majority, then, they might not survive long. Actually, you have the same logic in autocratic systems. As Shyam was mentioned, welfare state started in the late 18th century. It was Chancellor Bismarck of Imperial Germany. Certainly not. He was not a Democrat. This was not democratic society. He put in place the first broad-based social insurance systems. Why did he do that? He had 2 motives. And for first, directly go to this, you had the industrial working class in Germany who had lost access to the risk pooling institutions of old, which is the extended family and the village community. They sort of disappeared due to modernization and urbanization. They wanted, social protection, and the Social Democratic Party, over the revolution at that point, they wanted to give it to them. So Bismarck took preventive action and said, not because he was fear of losing the election, but he was afraid of a revolution, nothing less. And that's, fair enough. I think, I don't think that's very often the case, that, these policies are not just driven by left-wing people, they're also even right-wing people as a precautionary measure. Incidentally, Satvik, I mentioned that, there was a separate movement thing that Bismarck had, which might be relevant for India, India being a very diverse country. I don't know India that much, but I just suspect that in all big countries, there is always a risk of secession. It's always a risk somewhere that some of these states might, at some point think, are we better off alone? It's certainly a thing that the Chinese think about. And here's the thing, here's the Bismarckian argument. Bismarck put in place these broad-based social insurance systems just after German unification. Germany had been 27 small fiefdoms. Prussia was the biggest, but 26, each with their own royal house. It's similar to India before the British came, actually. And he wanted to solidify the German national state. And he thought it was always a risk that, Bayern or Württemberg would secede at some point, have a stronger loyalty, regional loyalty than national loyalty. So in order to boost the national loyalty of the Germans, he gave them a stake in the new state. So the state is going to give you pensions, the state is going to give you healthcare, not your regional government. The state is going to do this. So we solidified the loyalty of not only workers, but also of people in the different regions of Germany. So it was part of the German nation building process. And it has been astonishingly successful. The Bismarckian social legislation, you still see it, the structure in State Germany. A Germany that has lost 2 world wars and had a period with hyperinflation in between, ruined the middle class. A 2-state solution for 30 years after the war. Still, the only thing that has arrived in Germany are the social protection systems. These are resilient stuff. It's the glue of the nation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. A little bit long here, Satvik, but
thank you very much. Yeah.
Might be something to think about India here. Give the people a stake in the Indian state.
Sorry.
Give all the people a strong stake in the maintenance of an Indian state, or a Bangladeshi state, or Pakistani state, or a Chinese state.
Okay, Professor, we will now be moving on to the next question by Mohammad Waqif Min Hussain. He's written, a debt crisis is often associated with an increase in abnormal public expenditure, and debt ceilings are often an indicator. Do you think that social protection can be enhanced with losing market confidence? Consider a looming idea of debt crisis. So the main question.
That's one question. It's written here also. Good. Thank you, Mohammed. Yes, I think it can be done, but again, it depends on how you do it. Depends on the design of the welfare system, and that you can convey to investors that we have put in place a welfare system that is really, we have a high probability that this is going to be a social investment type of programs. So if you're not able to convince someone of that, then you have a problem. But I don't think a debt crisis is often associated with increase in abnormal public expenditure. I would say that if you are in a situation where you have abnormal public expenditure, that is sort of an indicator that you have not really a well-designed welfare social protection systems. Because if you had that, you would not have this uncontrolled public expenditure explosion. If you have that, that is an indicator that you should do some adjustment of the design. But you have to. You can't say that. Don't get me wrong here. You have to analyze the specific situation. Which country are we talking about? Which crisis are we talking about? And so on. I don't know if this answers your your question. Yeah.
Mohammed has written, thank you.
Okay.
So,
Actually, this question, if I may interrupt, any other question? Otherwise, I will stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll
I
just
mean,
ask one really small question, if it's okay. Shyam, can I go?
yeah, definitely, Anisha, please.
Okay. So, Professor, we see that in most of the developing countries, there is like this 5 years democratic political party shifts, right? 4 years, 5 years, they're shifting, and the way they look at welfare state is also shifting. Some government may, when they form, it's like, okay, we want employment. Some may say we want healthcare. And this seesaw between the kinds of things that they want to put forward for the people may sort of put people at a very uncomfortable position also at some point, because at some point there is more scope or money pooled for employment kind of employment opportunities or employment protection, while the next year it's something different. So how can we take that into consideration?
Well, I'm not sure it's a bug. It might be, point of the system that you can change policies. If nothing works, if something doesn't work, that's really how the opposition gets into power. And they get into power in order to say, we got to just try something else. So it's not necessarily a bug, it might be a feature of democratic systems that, rulers change all the time. Because it's a learning process. So I would not, I would put a more positive spin on it. You can get, in a sense that's what political competition is about. And I would argue that it's a good thing to have a political system where if the rulers happen to have bad ideas, that you can dispose of them fairly quickly and in a peaceful manner. So, some would argue that the best thing would have rulers who have really good ideas, put them in power and let them stay there forever. Like the Chinese, right? However, you can make an argument for enlightened autocracy, enlightened dictatorship. The problem, however, is first of all, to know if it's not enlightened or not. Are they really good ideas? Maybe they have bad ideas. No, then you can never get rid of them. Plus, you have this point: if people are put in place, even their good ideas to begin with, is it just sit there for 40 years until they die? You never get rid of them. And often people change across time. They might be enlightened in the first place, but after 20 years, they're not so enlightened anymore. But they're impossible to get rid of without using violence. So I think, although the system where, new rulers come in all the time, they squash all the old policies, put in something, it's messy, but it is a learning process. And it can work. I mean, it doesn't necessarily work, things can go wrong. But or in these kind of systems, you can have very short-termism. People don't care about what happens 4 or 5 years down the road. They only care about, being elected. But as a general rule, I think this is, how it should be. I would add, though, that you should also have a political culture that values evidence-informed policy. Because if you have sort of democracy and you have a respect for evidence, then actually people like us have a role, because we are doing randomized controlled trials, we are doing inference to the best explanation, we are trying to find out what works, what doesn't work. And if politicians care, they don't only care about that, but to some extent they care about, efficient policies. Combine that political culture with, being able to get rid of politicians who doesn't listen to what works and doesn't work. And that might, be a long-term quite successful, hopefully. But I don't know if this sort of answers your question, but I fully understand your worry. It's just that the alternative might be even worse, putting in place somebody who you really agree with, these guys really have good ideas, put them in place, and you can never, ever change them again. Well, then, you are then in a situation where you are powerless to stop them if they should turn from being enlightened to becoming not enlightened.
Satvik, would you like to go forward with your question?
I got a little bit distracted with the next answer. I forgot the question, but yeah,
okay.
This is actually interesting. If I take 2 minutes. After financial crisis, actually Chinese were teasing Americans, saying that, you see, your government changes, but your policy never changes. But in China, our government never changes, but we can change the policy in a matter of hours. But some other questions maybe. I will try to remember.
I think the Chinese rule is ruled by experts. That's what it really is these days. They call it communism, but it's ruled by experts. And I'm an expert myself, but would I trust myself for that reason? I spent 40 years studying social policy. Will I trust myself so much and give me dictatorial power and let me keep it forever and I'll always do a good job? No, I don't trust myself that much. I think I should have the fear of losing power. And I think that's important also for experts. And I think that, well, Xi Jinping, now president for life, if he wants to, he might be, I think it's a clever chap. And I had some stuff about the Chinese rural reforms I wanted to talk about, but I can talk about health reform. I really think is very intelligent. Nonetheless, 20 years down the line, is he still going to have good ideas? The sclerosis of the thing. The good thing about democracy is that you get another group of friends in power once in a while. It's not the same group of friends. Anyway, now we're into something else in economics. Sorry.
So if I can take the time, I have a question. So after the financial crisis of 2007 and 8, there were a rise in austerity programs around the world, and the most considerable ones were in the UK and the Eurozone. And particularly in the UK, because I'm researching this for my subject, I found that austerity has completely transformed the landscape of social protection schemes, because obviously government spending has been reduced with increased taxes. So, Professor, do you believe that such austerity schemes would lead to such so-called pro-market social protection systems, or would they actually lead to a regression in your belief of a pro-market social protection system?
It's a good question, Satvik, and it's an empirical question, right? It's an empirical question that's going to happen. It also has something to do with the peculiarities of the two British parties in particular, and the rather peculiar British system. Sometimes calls it electoral dictatorship. Whoever gets into power can do lots of strange stuff. But but when you have a tremendous crisis, you got to cut stuff. You got to balance the books. So then the question is how you do it. So that's going to be tough anyway. The trick would be in order to prevent this kind of crisis to take place. And this one started in the United States, and it has to do with bad incentive structure when it comes to credit housing markets, and it has to do with tremendous risk being installed into the insurance and credit markets, which no one was aware of. What shall I say? I think that the British are doing like the rest of Europeans. You can see that they are trying to make healthcare more efficient. They might not succeed with it. They are also increasing kindergartens. They are actually even Spain, Italy, and Greece were even worse hit than Great Britain. They expand certain types of welfare programs, and they are for children and women. Also, to get more women into the labor force, which is, a classical division of labor argument. Get more women into the labor force. Everybody is using their comparative advantage, rather than half of the population just raising kids, which is not an efficient way to use the labor force. So I would argue that they are doing it. I think they are too unmerciful in the sense of Britain in the point, and they also had this hang-up that welfare is primarily about caring for the poorest. So they had lots of means-tested systems. Means-tested systems are bad. They are bad incentives. If you have means-tested systems, basically means that we start to working and they cut back on your social assistance benefits. You have a very high marginal tax rate. So, it's a disincentive to work. The insurance aspect is not so much about, the welfare argument is not so much about equality as it is about security and protection. And that's also why, for instance, instead of universal credit, which they have now, I think you should have different insurance system for people with disabilities and ordinary unemployed people. And the British have moved in the direction of going away from that to some extent. Because I think the risk of disability is different from the risk of unemployment. There's a larger moral hazard problem when it comes to unemployment, which means that you have to have a lower, you have to be tougher. Then when it comes to disability, you don't have a large moral hazard problem. Nobody becomes disabled in order to get the benefit. But people might be tempted to become unemployed in order to get unemployment benefit. Because the risks are different, you should diversify these systems. And I think the Brits, with their obsession about caring only for the poorest, they don't see that these risks are different, and some of these risks should have high compensation rates in order to have a human social policy. Going off on a tangent here, perhaps that wasn't exactly what you talked about, but I think there are more cleverer way to deal with a crisis than the Brits are doing. Having said that, the British people wanted this government to continue, and
for the past 10 years, it's not changed.
They say never argue with the market. They never argue with the voters. If they want this, okay. But hopefully, the fallout will be so that they will want to try another government down the line.
Yes, Satvik, you have a question.
Yeah, it's 2-3 small questions. The first is that when we do any policy analysis, it's often that economic factors are taken more seriously than the other factors. For example, we look at cost, we look at how much monetary terms we are spending and how much in monetary terms we are benefiting. So how do you see it as a social policy scholar? And I have one more. Often, because of the way the democracies are structured, not all proportional representations are included. For example, in India, a party can be in power centrally at the union level in Delhi with maybe 34 to 39% vote share. So how do you see, or how do you compare welfare outcome of this kind of democracies with those who have proportional representation? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Satvik. Well, it's an interesting literature on the difference between federal states like India and unitary states like my own. where federal states have a more complex structure. You have regional governments which are powerful. The unitary states don't have that. They have municipalities, but they are not powerful in that. The regional governments are. So there is one hypothesis is that that federal governments more often do social policy through regulations rather than tax and spend policies. Because regulations, the federal governments can often impose on everybody. But when it comes to taxes, often regional governments want to, in particular regional governments in wealthy regional governments, don't want to share their wealth with poorer states and poorer regional governments. So, Australia is a classic example, where also a federal state, where they have a lot of social policy, but a lot of it is regulation rather than tax and spend. It is, there's a big debate here. Not everybody agrees, but I've seen also studies of India who suggest that there might be something here indicating that that is something about how you do social policy. Generally, if it's some truth in this, then you can say that the federal state, in a sense, have a smaller palette, a smaller smorgasbord of things to do. But still, okay. So that would be my argument. Big states also might have problems doing stuff that small states can do easier. There might be sort of a small state benefit, possibly. A bit depressing if you're in India, of course. But having said that, I'm not. I mean, these are controversial stuff. But your first question, so you must repeat that again.
Ask about that whenever we analyze the policy, we look at in terms of economics, cost and benefit.
Yeah. Well, I would actually argue that I'm a consensus. I'm a sort of a consensus-oriented person. I think I actually think economists also human flourishing. Amartya Sen, enhance capabilities of people. I think that makes a lot of economic sense. It's a lot of economic sense. Again, it boils down to this social investment aspect, investing in people, so they can utilize their creativity and you bring them up so that they can, their human potential can be brought to the max. I think that's, economically very clever. It's sort of enlightened self-interest on behalf of all of us. You don't really have to. It's nice if you also do it because you really like other people. I certainly hope that's the case among humans. But even if you want, for the sake of argument, to take this hard-nosed economic point of view, where's the money? I think arguing that, investing in human capital, investing peaceful societies will attract investors. Societies where you're not really certain if somebody else will come into power for now, we will confiscate everything you own. You don't take the risk to invest there. So I actually think it's possible to be friends with economists. Actually, Gary Becker, which is together with Milton Friedman and Hayek, and sort of the three riders of the neoliberal apocalypse to some extent. But if you actually read what these people are saying, in particular Gary Becker is interesting. He got the Nobel Prize for his human capital theory. And there's some interesting interviews with this guy who makes a lot of social democratic sense. Invest in human capital. It's good for the economy. It's good for the top arguments I pursued. So I don't really portray neoclassical economists as as people who are cynical and not really caring about people. It's certainly not their self-image either. but maybe I'm too optimistic here, something. But I actually think there is an emerging consensus. Roth talk about overlapping consensus, and and from a sociological perspective, a psychological perspective, you can obviously argue for welfare, that's obvious, But if you also can argue for that, if you, for the sake of argument, take a very sort of hard-nosed economic perspective, then from different points of view, we agree on the same policies. And that's an interesting thing, and that's a hopeful thing, really. So I see great hope in for the world. I am very optimistic about how things are developing. I'm not at all agree. I think we have the bumps on the road, and part of the thing is also tied to the demographic transition kind of thing. If I might just plug in that, India is now at 2.4 children per woman, if you can trust the statistics, going down very fast. Bangladesh is at 2.1. They're just, Turkey and Iran way below 2.1. So you're moving into the demographic gift period. And the places, 30 years ago, the places where there are poor people were in Asia. Why? Well, basically it is because Asian countries then were early in the transition. If you look at Mali now, I'm interested in the Sahel region. Look at Mali, 40% of people in Mali are below 15 years old. Now, for that reason alone, you don't have to bring in corruption or anything. That means that 40% of the population are not producing anything. They're consuming more than they produce. Okay? You have to invest in these people, education, at least they can eat food. And you also have subsistence agriculture. So you can't tax the people who are working age because they have all these kids to take care of. So, Mali has an enormous problem at the moment because they can't tax the people to give education, healthcare, but it basically is demographics. And if the demographic transition also takes place in Mali, like it looks like it's happening everywhere, then this is a temporary thing. It's a temporary thing. Then 70 years down the line, you have Japan. You have the problem with too many old people. But still, it's sort of a nice problem to have that people live very long. And that's also why economic growth is slowing down in high-income countries. That's the basic reason. That's the basic reason why we have convergence, that middle-income countries are catching up, because high-income countries are now, we now get all the old people, and the productivity is slowing down. So give it 70 to 100 years. None of us will be here, and then things will go to be pretty nice everywhere. And India, I really, if I had money to invest, I would invest in India, because you're now moving into the demographic gift period. Even more, Bangladesh moving into the demographic gift period, like in Vietnam, and China is now actually starting to move out of it. So you are headed for some fantastic times. If you avoid the civil war in between, like in Syria, they have a civil war in the middle of the demographic transition. Just avoid that, and you're going to catch up. That's my prediction.
Okay, with this positive note, if there is any other questions.
No, there aren't any.
Okay, then Einar, Professor Øverbye, Einar, thank you very much for your time. I'm grateful. We are all grateful for your time, and you shared so much with us. Hopefully, we will invite you again sometime in future, because it's our pleasure that you shared your time. And yeah, I felt like going back to my college days, but that's the third time I'm saying. So thank you. And with this, we are officially closing it. Tomorrow we have another session with Benjamin Davey. He would be talking about law is an anagram of wealth. So he's going to argue whether law is actually the source of wealth creation. So it's an antithesis of Pfister's work. So if you have time, join us tomorrow. And with this, thank you, Einar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been fun. Thank you for inviting me.
So